The sound of shattering glass pierced the quiet night as Penelope Porter flinched, her eyes darting nervously to the door of the saloon. Wyoming Territory, 1879, a land of promise and peril where Penelope had come to start anew, only to find herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. "That'll be my husband," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she clutched her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders. "He always gets this way after payday." The tall cowboy across from her raised his gaze, sharp blue eyes assessing the fear etched across her delicate features. Victor Quaid had ridden into Willow Creek just 3 days prior, seeking nothing more than a hot meal and perhaps work at one of the nearby ranches. Instead, he found himself drawn to the haunted eyes of the town's newest seamstress. "My husband's drunk," she said, her voice barely audible over the piano music drifting through the saloon. Victor's weathered hand moved instinctively to the holster at his side. "Then I'll keep you safe till he's nothing but a memory," he replied, his voice low and steady as thunder rolling across the distant plains. Penelope's eyes widened. "Sir, you don't understand." The saloon doors burst open, revealing the imposing figure of Elias Porter, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. His eyes, bloodshot and wild, scanned the room before settling on his wife. "There you are," he slurred, staggering forward. "Thought you could hide from me, did you?" Victor rose to his feet, his 6'3" frame casting a long shadow across the sawdust-covered floor. "The lady doesn't want company tonight, friend." Elias sneered, revealing tobacco-stained teeth beneath his unkempt mustache. "That lady is my wife, Cowboy. Step aside." "Not tonight," Victor replied, his stance casual but his eyes alert. Years of driving cattle and facing down rustlers had taught him when trouble was brewing. Elias lunged forward, a knife appearing in his hand seemingly from nowhere. Victor moved with practiced precision, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting until the weapon clattered to the floor. With a swift movement, he pushed Elias back toward the door. "Go sleep it off," Victor advised, his tone deceptively gentle. "Come back when you're sober." "This ain't over," Elias spat, stumbling backward. "She's mine." He shot Penelope a look that made her shrink into her chair before he disappeared into the night. The saloon fell silent for a moment before conversations gradually resumed. Victor turned to find Penelope gathering her belongings with shaking hands. "I need to go," she whispered. "He'll be waiting at home. It'll be worse if I don't return." Victor shook his head. "I meant what I said. I'll keep you safe." Penelope looked up at him, desperation and hope battling in her green eyes. "You don't know him. He's connected to the sheriff. No one in this town dares cross Elias Porter." "I'm not from this town," Victor said simply, offering his hand. "Come with me. Just tonight. Give him time to cool down." Penelope hesitated, years of fear and obedience warring with her desperate need for escape. Finally, she placed her small hand in his. "Just tonight," she agreed. Outside, the night air carried the scent of sagebrush and distant rain. Victor led Penelope to the modest boarding house where he'd taken a room. Mrs. Hollister, the elderly proprietor, raised an eyebrow at the sight of them, but said nothing as Victor explained that Miss Porter needed safe harbor for the evening. "You can have the bed," Victor said once they were inside his sparse room. "I'll take the floor." Penelope stood awkwardly by the door. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me." Victor removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "My mother lived with a man like your husband for 15 years. No one helped her." He met Penelope's gaze. "I was too young then. I'm not now." "Elias wasn't always like this," Penelope said softly, sinking onto the edge of the narrow bed. "When we married 3 years ago, he was kind, ambitious. Then the mine venture failed, and the drinking started. That's no excuse for how he treats you," Victor said, his voice gentle but firm. Penelope's hands twisted in her lap. "I've thought of leaving. But where would I go? I have no family, no money of my own. He makes sure of that." "The world's a big place, Miss Porter." "Penelope," she corrected. "If you're offering me sanctuary, you might as well use my Christian name." Victor nodded. "Penelope, then. And I'm Victor." He pulled a blanket from his saddlebag and laid it on the floor. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure something out." As Penelope lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Victor's steady breathing from his makeshift bed on the floor, She wondered if she was trading one danger for another. But for the first time in years, the knot of fear in her chest had loosened slightly. Sleep claimed her before she could worry further. Dawn brought clarity and fresh fears. Penelope woke to find Victor already dressed, his expression grim. "Your husband's been asking after you," he said without preamble. "Mrs. Hollister warned me when I went for coffee. Says he's threatening to burn down her establishment if she's hiding you." Penelope closed her eyes briefly. "I should go back, before he hurts someone else." "No." Victor's voice was like steel. "That's not an option." He paused, considering. "I'm heading north to Montana Territory. There's work there, open country. Come with me." Penelope stared at him in disbelief. "I can't just leave, run away with a stranger." "You can stay and wait for him to kill you in one of his rages," Victor said bluntly. "Or you can take a chance on something better." Before Penelope could respond, a commotion erupted downstairs. Heavy footsteps pounded on the stairs, followed by Mrs. Hollister's protests. "He's here," Penelope whispered, terror flooding her veins. Victor moved quickly, grabbing his gun belt. Out the window. Now, the fire escape was little more than a rickety wooden ladder, but Penelope didn't hesitate. She scrambled through the window, her skirts catching on the sill. Victor followed just as the door to his room splintered open. "Run," he urged, helping her down. "To the stables. I'll be right behind you." Penelope gathered her skirts and ran as she hadn't since childhood, heart pounding in her chest. Behind her, she heard shouts and what might have been a gunshot, but fear drove her forward without looking back. The stable was empty save for a sleepy-eyed boy who jumped to attention when Penelope burst in. "Mr. Quaid's horse," she gasped. "Please, quickly." The boy, sensing urgency, didn't ask questions. He let out Victor's chestnut gelding, already saddled from an early morning ride. Moments later, Victor appeared, a thin trail of blood seeping from a cut above his eye. "Your husband has poor aim," he said grimly, pulling himself into the saddle and extending a hand to Penelope. She hesitated only a second before taking it, allowing him to pull her up behind him. "The sheriff, already on his way," Victor confirmed, "which is why we need to leave now." The horse bolted forward, hooves clattering on the packed dirt of Willow Creek's main street. Penelope clung to Victor's waist, not daring to look back as shouts followed them. The town quickly fell behind as Victor urged his mount toward the open country beyond. They rode hard for hours, stopping only when the horse needed rest. By midday, they'd left Wyoming Territory behind and crossed into Montana. Victor finally allowed them a longer break near a small stream, helping Penelope down from the saddle. Her legs nearly buckled beneath her, unaccustomed to long hours of riding. Victor steadied her with a strong hand. "Thank you," she said, suddenly aware of how completely she had upended her life in the span of a morning. "Though I'm not sure what I'm thanking you for. Kidnapping me? Making me a fugitive?" Victor's lips quirked into a slight smile. "I believe you came willingly, Miss Porter." "Penelope," she reminded him, then sighed. "Yes, I did. God help me." "God helps those who help themselves," Victor replied, leading the horse to water. "You've taken the first step toward a better life." Penelope looked down at her rumpled dress, her city boots already scuffed and ruined. "Some better life. I've left behind everything I own." "Material things can be replaced," Victor said. "Your life can't." They rested only briefly before continuing north. Victor explained his plan to reach a ranch where he'd worked previously, owned by a fair-minded man named Henry Sullivan who might offer them both employment. Penelope listened, trying to imagine herself in this new future being sketched before her. "What will you tell him about me?" she asked as the afternoon sun began its descent. Victor was quiet for a moment. "The truth, that you needed help, and I gave it. And he won't turn me away? Or worse, send word back to Elias." "Sullivan's a good man," Victor assured her. "He judges people by their character, not their circumstances." Night was falling when they reached a small settlement, little more than a trading post and a few scattered cabins. Victor secured them a room at the modest boarding house, introducing Penelope as his sister to avoid scandal. The elderly woman who owned the establishment seemed dubious but accepted the story along with Victor's payment. The room was tiny, with a single narrow bed. Victor immediately declared he would sleep on the floor again. "You need proper rest," Penelope protested. You've been riding all day, and before that, you slept on a hard floor. I've slept on worse, he assured her, arranging his saddle blanket. Penelope sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what she'd done. He'll come looking for me, she whispered. Elias won't let me go. Victor paused in his preparations. We've crossed territory lines. The sheriff back in Willow Creek has no jurisdiction here. Elias won't care about jurisdiction, Penelope said, twisting her hands in her lap. To him, I'm property that's been stolen. Victor knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. Penelope, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, I meant what I said. I'll keep you safe until he's nothing but a memory, even if that means we keep riding to Canada or beyond. Penelope studied his face, searching for deceit or ulterior motives, but found only honest determination. Why? She asked softly. Why risk everything for a woman you barely know? Victor's expression softened. Because everyone deserves a chance at freedom, at happiness. He released her hands and stood. Get some rest. We've still got a long ride ahead of us. As Penelope lay in the darkness, listening to Victor's steady breathing from his place on the floor, she realized that for the first time in years, she was thinking about tomorrow with hope rather than dread. They continued their journey at dawn, pushing northward toward the ranch Victor had spoken of. The land changed around them, opening into vast rolling prairies that seemed to stretch forever beneath the endless Montana sky. It's beautiful, Penelope breathed, taking in the wildflowers dotting the grasslands. So different from the mining town. This is real country, Victor agreed, his voice warm with affection for the landscape. A place where a person can breathe. By late afternoon, they crested a hill to see a sprawling ranch in the valley below. Smoke curled from the chimney of a solid log house, and cattle grazed in the distant fields. Sullivan's place, Victor announced. We made it. Penelope felt a flutter of anxiety. What if he doesn't want me here? Then we'll figure something else out, Victor assured her. Together. Henry Sullivan proved to be a barrel-chested man with a booming laugh and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. He welcomed Victor with a hearty handshake and listened carefully to their story or the version Victor shared, which emphasized Penelope's need for safety without details that weren't his to tell. My wife Mabel passed 2 winters ago, Sullivan said when Victor finished. Been running this place with just the cowhands and a cook who can barely boil water. Could use a woman's touch around the house. He turned to Penelope. Can you cook, girl? Penelope straightened her spine. Yes, sir. And so, I was a seamstress. Sullivan nodded approvingly. Then you've got a place here. As for you, Quaid, I need a foreman who knows his business. Job's yours if you want it. Just like that, Penelope found herself installed in the ranch house, while Victor took up residence in the foreman's cabin nearby. The arrangement gave her a measure of respectability while allowing her the security of knowing Victor was close. The following weeks settled into a rhythm. Penelope took charge of the household, cooking for Sullivan and the ranch hands, mending clothes, and bringing order to the bachelor chaos that had reigned since Mabel Sullivan's passing. The work was hard but satisfying, and Sullivan proved to be a fair employer who valued her contributions. Victor, meanwhile, threw himself into managing the ranch operations. He had a natural way with both cattle and men, earning respect through competence rather than intimidation. Penelope often watched him from the kitchen window as he worked with the horses or instructed the younger hands, admiring his patience and quiet authority. They saw each other daily, but rarely alone. Sullivan's ranch operated under strict propriety, with the unmarried men taking meals at the bunkhouse and Victor joining Sullivan and Penelope in the main house only for Sunday dinners. On those occasions, Penelope found herself growing increasingly aware of Victor's presence, the deep timbre of his voice, the grace of his weathered hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. One evening, nearly 2 months after their arrival, Sullivan unexpectedly announced he needed to travel to Helena on business and would be gone for several days. Keep things running smooth, he instructed Victor, and keep an eye on Mrs. Porter. Still not convinced that husband of hers won't come sniffing around eventually. Penelope froze at the mention of Elias, the serving spoon in her hand hovering over the table. Victor noticed her distress immediately. No one knows you're here, he assured her once Sullivan had left the room. And even if he did come looking, he'd find more than he bargained for. Penelope nodded, but the specter of Elias had been raised, disrupting the sense of security she'd been building. That night, she struggled to sleep, jumping at every creak of the old house settling. The following day, with Sullivan gone, Victor suggested they ride out to check a section of fencing on the property's northern boundary. "The fresh air will do you good," he said, noting the shadows under her eyes. "And it'll give us a chance to talk properly." The late summer day was perfect for riding, with a gentle breeze keeping the heat at bay. Penelope wore a split riding skirt she'd fashioned from one of Mabel Sullivan's old dresses, allowing her to ride astride rather than side saddle. Victor had taught her to ride properly during their journey north, and she found she enjoyed the freedom of movement it gave her. They rode in companionable silence for a time, Penelope gradually relaxing as they put distance between themselves and the ranch house. Victor led them to a small rise overlooking a creek, where cottonwoods offered dappled shade. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," he said as they dismounted. "Peaceful." Penelope sank onto the soft grass, arranging her skirts around her. "It's lovely. Thank you for bringing me." Victor settled beside her, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "You seemed troubled last night. After Sullivan mentioned your husband." Penelope plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. "I've been foolish, allowing myself to feel safe. Elias won't forget. Or forgive. It's not foolish to hope for better," Victor said gently. "And you are safe here." Penelope looked up at him, studying the strong lines of his face. "Because of you," she acknowledged. "You've risked everything for me, and I've never properly thanked you." Victor shook his head. "No thanks needed. I did what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true," Penelope said softly. "Most men would have walked away, would have told me it wasn't their problem." Victor was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "When I was 10 years old," he finally said, "my father died in a mining accident. My mother remarried a year later a man named Jenkins who seemed kind enough at first. But once they were wed, he changed. His jaw tightened. He'd drink, then use his fists on her. On me, when I tried to stop him." Penelope's heart ached at the image of Victor as a boy, trying to protect his mother. "What happened?" "She endured it for years," Victor continued, his voice low. "Always making excuses for him. Always believing he'd change back to the man she thought she'd married. Then one night, he came home drunker than usual. Beat her so badly, she couldn't get out of bed for days. He met Penelope's eyes. She died 3 months later. The doctor called it pneumonia, but I know it was a broken spirit." "I'm so sorry," Penelope whispered, impulsively reaching out to touch his hand. Victor turned his palm up, capturing her fingers in his. "I swore then that I'd never stand by and watch someone suffer like that again. So you see, helping you wasn't a choice. It was the only thing I could do." The connection between them intensified in that moment, built on shared understanding and mutual respect. Penelope felt something shift in her heart, a tenderness blooming that both thrilled and frightened her. "Victor," she began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to speak. He released her hand slowly, reluctantly. "We should check that fence line before heading back," he said, rising to his feet and offering her his hand. The spell was broken, but something had changed between them. As they rode back to the ranch house that evening, Penelope was acutely aware of Victor beside her, of the strength and gentleness that defined him, of the growing feelings she could no longer deny. That night, alone in her room, Penelope confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling in love with Victor Quaid. The realization should have terrified her. She was, after all, still legally married to Elias, but instead, it filled her with a quiet determination. Somehow, she would find a way to truly free herself from her past and embrace the possibility of a future with Victor. The following morning brought unexpected news. One of the hands rode in from town with a newspaper and word of a manhunt for Elias Porter, wanted for the murder of Sheriff Thompson back in Willow Creek. "Seems your husband shot the sheriff when he refused to form a posse to chase after you," Victor told Penelope privately after reading the account. "Then he disappeared. They think he might be headed this way." Penelope sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I hadn't run, no," Victor said firmly, kneeling before her. "Elias made his own choices. This is on him, not you. But now he has nothing to lose, Penelope said, fear making her voice tremble. He'll be more dangerous than ever. Victor took her hands in his. I won't let him hurt you. I promise. For the next several days, the ranch operated under heightened vigilance. Sullivan returned from Helena and, upon learning of the situation, immediately ordered additional men to patrol the property boundaries. Victor moved temporarily into the main house, sleeping on a cot in the parlor to be closer to Penelope. The threat of Elias cast a shadow over the ranch, but paradoxically, it brought Penelope and Victor closer together. With Sullivan's tacit approval, they spent more time in each other's company, always within the bounds of propriety, but sharing conversations, meals, and quiet moments that deepened their connection. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Victor broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. Have you given thought to what you want for your future? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Once this business with Elias is resolved. Penelope's hands stilled in her lap. I've tried not to think too far ahead, she admitted. It seems presumptuous when I'm still tied to him. Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. There are lawyers in Helena who might help you obtain a divorce on grounds of cruelty. It's not easy, but it's possible. Hope fluttered in Penelope's chest. Do you really think so? I've been making inquiries, Victor said. Sullivan has connections in Helena. He believes your case would be viewed sympathetically, especially now with Elias wanted for murder. Penelope was silent for a long moment, absorbing this possibility. If I were free, she said slowly, truly free, I think I'd want to stay here. She risked a glance at Victor. I've found happiness here that I never thought possible. Victor's expression softened, his eyes warming as they held hers. I'm glad, he said simply, but the depth of emotion in those two words told Penelope everything she needed to know about his feelings. Before either could say more, the distant sound of a rider approaching at speed broke the moment. Victor was on his feet instantly, hand moving to his sidearm. Get inside, he instructed, his voice steady but urgent. Penelope obeyed, watching through the window as one of the ranch hands galloped into the yard, his horse lathered with sweat. The man's urgent conversation with Victor was brief, but Penelope could read the gravity of the situation in Victor's stance. When he returned to the house, his expression was grim. Elias was spotted in a settlement 30 miles east of here. He's been asking questions about a dark-haired woman traveling with a tall cowboy. Fear clutched at Penelope's heart. He's coming for me. He'll have to go through me first, Victor said, his tone leaving no doubt about his determination. Sullivan joined them, his weathered face set in hard lines. We'll be ready for him, he assured Penelope. No man threatens one of mine on my own property. The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Extra men were posted around the ranch, and Penelope rarely left the main house. Victor was a constant presence, his vigilance never wavering despite the toll it was taking on him. On the 4th day, Sullivan insisted that life on the ranch needed to continue as normal. Can't put everything on hold waiting for a madman who might never show, he declared. Quaid, take the men and move that herd from the north pasture like we planned. I'll stay here with Mrs. Porter. Victor reluctantly agreed, though Penelope could see his concern. I'll be back before sundown, he promised her privately. Lock the doors while I'm gone. The day passed slowly, with Penelope keeping busy in the kitchen preparing a stew for the men's return. Sullivan sat at the table cleaning his shotgun, his presence reassuring despite his gruff demeanor. Quaid's sweet on you, he said abruptly, breaking a long silence. Not that it's any of my business. Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mr. Sullivan, just stating facts, Sullivan continued, squinting down the barrel of his gun. Never seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you. Man's fallen hard. Penelope busied herself with kneading dough. I'm still married, she reminded him softly. Technicality, Sullivan snorted. No court would fault you for leaving a man like your husband. He reassembled his shotgun with practiced hands. Life's too short to waste on the wrong people, girl. Trust me on that. Before Penelope could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats caught their attention. Sullivan moved to the window, shotgun ready. Single rider, he reported. Coming fast. Penelope's heart raced as she joined him at the window. The approaching figure was still too far to identify clearly, but something about the way he rode sent ice through her veins. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Elias." Sullivan's face hardened. "Go upstairs. Lock yourself in the bedroom and don't come out until I call you." "But no arguments," Sullivan cut her off. "This is my house, and I'll deal with unwanted visitors my way." Penelope retreated upstairs, but instead of locking herself in her bedroom, she went to Sullivan's room where she knew he kept a revolver in his bedside drawer. Her hands trembled as she checked that it was loaded, remembering the basic instructions Victor had given her during their journey north. From the window, she watched as Elias rode into the yard. Even at a distance, she could see that the past months had not been kind to him. He was thinner, wilder-looking, with several days' growth of beard shadowing his face. Sullivan stepped onto the porch, shotgun clearly visible. The two men exchanged words that Penelope couldn't hear, but Sullivan's stance remained unyielding, blocking the entrance to his home. Then, with terrifying suddenness, Elias drew his pistol. Sullivan fired first, the shotgun's blast sending Elias tumbling from his horse. For a moment, Penelope thought it was over, but Elias rolled to his feet with surprising agility, returning fire. Sullivan staggered, clutching his shoulder, but remained standing. Before he could fire again, Elias rushed him, tackling the older man to the ground. Penelope didn't remember running downstairs. She found herself on the porch, Sullivan's revolver in her hands, watching in horror as Elias and Sullivan struggled for control of the shotgun. "Elias," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. "Stop this." Elias looked up, his face contorting with rage when he saw her. "There you are, you faithless whore," he snarled, delivering a final blow to Sullivan that left the rancher motionless. He rose, blood streaming from a wound on his temple. "Did you think I wouldn't find you? That I'd let you run off with another man?" Penelope held the revolver steady, pointing it at Elias's chest. "I'm not going back with you." Elias laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You don't have a choice. You're my wife. Mine." He took a step toward her. "Now put down that gun before you hurt yourself." "Stay back," Penelope warned, cocking the hammer. Elias paused, seeming to reassess her determination. His eyes narrowed. "You won't shoot me. You don't have the spine for it." "Try me," Penelope said, surprising herself with her steadiness. For a tense moment, they stood at an impasse. Then Elias's expression changed, calculation replacing rage. "I admit, I've been hard on you," he said, his tone suddenly conciliatory. "The drinking, the temper. I can change, Penny. I will change. Just come home." Penelope nearly faltered at the use of her childhood nickname, at the glimpse of the man she'd once believed in. But then she remembered the years of terror, of walking on eggshells, of bruises hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves. "No," she said firmly. "It's over, Elias. I'm not your property. I'm filing for divorce." Fury twisted Elias's features. "No court will grant it," he spat. "Not in this territory." "She won't need to convince a court," came Victor's voice from behind Elias. "They grant divorces to widows without question." Elias whirled to find Victor standing there, revolver drawn. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy," he growled. "You made it my concern when you came after her," Victor replied, his voice deadly calm. "Drop your weapon." Elias's eyes darted between Victor and Penelope, calculating his odds. 2 against 1, he said with a twisted smile. "Not very sporting." "Nothing sporting about beating your wife," Victor countered, "or shooting an unarmed sheriff in the back." "He wouldn't help me find what's mine," Elias said, his hand inching toward his holster. "Don't," Victor warned. "I don't want to kill you, but I will if you force my hand." For a breathless moment, Penelope thought Elias might surrender. Then, with lightning speed, he drew and fired at Victor. Victor's return shot was immediate. Elias staggered backward, a look of surprise crossing his face as he looked down at the spreading stain on his chest. He dropped to his knees, then pitched forward onto the dirt of the ranch yard. The sudden silence was deafening. Penelope lowered her revolver, her entire body trembling as reaction set in. Victor moved quickly to check Sullivan, who was beginning to stir with a groan. "Just knocked out," Victor reported with relief. "Bullet grazed his shoulder, but he'll be fine." He looked up at Penelope, concern etched in his features. "Are you all right?" Penelope stared at Elias's motionless form, emotions warring within her: relief, grief for the man he might have been, guilt that she felt no desire to go to him in his final moments. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's over now," he said gently. "He can't hurt you anymore." The following weeks passed in a blur. There was an inquest into Elias's death, but with Sullivan's testimony and the outstanding warrant for Elias's arrest, the shooting was quickly ruled justified. Elias was buried in an unmarked grave at the edge of town, attended only by the preacher and the undertaker. Penelope mourned not for the man Elias had become, but for the dreams she'd once held, the life she'd imagined when she'd set her vows. Victor gave her space to process her complicated feelings, always near but never pressing, his steady presence a comfort she came to rely on. With autumn's arrival, bringing cooler days and golden light that set the grasslands ablaze with color, Penelope found herself emerging from the shadow of her past. The law considered her a widow now, free to make her own choices, to build a new life. One crisp October evening, Victor invited her to ride with him to the rise overlooking the creek, their special place. The cottonwoods had turned brilliant yellow, their leaves catching the late afternoon sun like flakes of gold. "Winter will be here soon," Victor observed as they dismounted. "First snows usually come by early November." Penelope wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Sullivan offered to let me stay on through the winter. Said the house needs a woman's touch year-round." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "He's right. You've made that house a home again." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But I was hoping you might consider a different arrangement." Penelope's heart quickened. "What sort of arrangement?" Victor took her hands in his blue eyes earnest as they met hers. "I know it's soon. You've barely had time to process everything that's happened. But I need you to know that my feelings for you run deeper than just wanting to protect you." He squeezed her fingers gently. "I love you, Penelope. I think I started falling for you that first night in the saloon, when you showed such courage in the face of fear." Tears welled in Penelope's eyes. "Victor, you don't need to answer now," he hurried on. "I know you need time. But Sullivan's offered me partnership in the ranch, and I've accepted. I'll be building my own house come spring, and I'd like nothing more than to build it for two." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's. She'd want you to have it, when you're ready." Penelope looked at the ring, then back at Victor's face, the face that had come to represent safety, respect, and a kind of love she'd never known was possible. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I know my heart, Victor. I love you too." Joy bloomed in Victor's expression. "You're sure? I don't want to rush you. Life's too short to waste on the wrong people," Penelope said, echoing Sullivan's words. "And you, Victor Quaid, are definitely the right one." Victor slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of tenderness to come, but it quickly deepened as months of unspoken longing found release. When they finally parted, both breathless, Victor rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said that night," he murmured. "I'll keep you safe for the rest of our lives." Penelope smiled, her heart full. "I know you will. But you've done something far greater than keeping me safe, Victor. You've shown me that I'm strong enough to save myself." They were married on Christmas Day, 1879, in Sullivan's parlor, with the rancher himself giving away the bride. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by the ranch hands and a few neighbors who had come to respect the quiet, capable woman who had transformed the Sullivan Ranch with her presence. Victor and Penelope spent that winter in the foreman's cabin, which they made cozy with Penelope's touch. By spring, construction began on their own home, a sturdy, welcoming house built on a rise overlooking a creek lined with cottonwoods. Years passed, bringing changes to the ranch and to their family. Sullivan eventually sold them his share of the property, retiring to Helena to live with his sister. The Quaid Ranch prospered under Victor's management and Penelope's prudent oversight of the finances. Their first child, a daughter named Margaret after Victor's mother, arrived in the summer of 1881, followed 2 years later by a son they called Henry in honor of Sullivan. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Victor surprised Penelope with a trip back to that special rise where he'd proposed. They rode out at sunset, leaving their children in the capable hands of their housekeeper for the evening. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago. Penelope reflected as they spread a blanket beneath the cottonwoods, now grown taller and fuller. That you saved me from Elias. Victor shook his head, drawing her close against the evening chill. You saved yourself, Penelope. I just offered a hand up. She smiled, leaning into his embrace. We saved each other, I think. She gazed out at the ranch that had become their kingdom, at the home they'd built together. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to Willow Creek that day? No, Victor said simply. Some things are meant to be. I was always meant to find you. As the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Penelope thought about the frightened woman she'd been, whispering, "My husband's drunk," to a stranger in a saloon. How far she had come since then, how much she had grown in strength and confidence. Elias was truly nothing but a distant memory now, the fear he'd once inspired replaced by the deep, abiding love she shared with Victor. I have something for you, Victor said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a delicate gold locket. Open it. Inside was a tiny portrait of their children on one side, and on the other, a lock of Victor's dark hair entwined with her own auburn strands. So we're always with you, he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Even when we're apart. Penelope touched the locket, emotion tightening her throat. I couldn't imagine a more perfect life than the one we've built together, she whispered. Neither could I, Victor agreed, his arms tightening around her. And we're just getting started. As twilight deepened into night, they remained on their hillside, talking of the past they'd overcome and the future stretching bright before them. When they finally rode home beneath a canopy of stars, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety, but the truest form of love, one built on respect, trust, and the courage to begin again. In the years that followed, the story of how they met became a family legend, told and retold to their children and eventually their grandchildren. But for Penelope and Victor, it was more than just a story. It was the moment their lives had truly begun, when a desperate whisper and a solemn promise had set them on the path to finding home in each other's hearts.